Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Grangs, chair of the Urban and Regional Planning Program here at the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. And I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Carissa Slotterback. She is currently Associate Dean at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. She's also on the faculty of the Urban and Regional Planning program at the Humphrey School. Through her research and her work, she's deeply engaged in public engagement, community and public engagement in a variety of different ways, in looking at the environment, land use, transportation planning. And she demonstrates this commitment to public engagement through not only her research, but in her work as an administrator. As an example, she co-founded and directed the Resilient Communities Project, which is a community university partnership lining up students and faculty working in communities to advance sustainability. She's also served previously as Director of Research Engagement in the University of Minnesota's Office of the Vice President for Research. She's also a leader in our field in a number of ways. She's the incoming vice president-elect of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning. Just last year, she was inducted as a fellow into the American Institute of Certified Planners. And I've had the good fortune of working with Carissa closely now for a number of years on a wide range of issues. And I think she's a truly special leader. She's been instrumental in rolling out several initiatives that I think are far-reaching and will have an impact on the field of urban planning for many years to come. As you can see from her FAICP credentials, she's a longtime contributor to the practice side of urban planning. She's always been engaged with the local APA chapter. She's always attending the national APA conference and giving presentations on her research and engaging with leaders at that level of practice. She chairs many committees through the APA. She's long served as a conduit between practice and educators through her work with APA, the Planning Accreditation Board, and ACSP. She's also been at the center of transforming planning education and scholarship. I understand that doing community engagement right is very hard to do. And Carissa demonstrates through her work how to give us planners guidance in doing something that many of us espouse to but often fall short on. She has a really keen sense of the big issues facing educators today. She's deeply committed to social justice. She has a well-honed sensitivity to advance the cause of social justice, an issue that is often challenging and even painful sometimes in the work that we do around social justice. She has an astonishing record of involvement at many levels. I've mentioned many of them already: APA, PAB, ACSP, AICP, the upper rungs of her own university's administration. So I see her in some ways as a gorilla in the bureaucracy. She's somebody who's willing to get in to leadership roles to make change that many of us really care about. Finally, I know that she loves her work. She's really deeply committed to problem solving, a consummate urban planner, if I may say so. She has the vision to see when things need improving, and she has the courage to be a leader, to take the steps towards action to making change happen. So I think we're very lucky to have her leadership in our field, and I'm really grateful that she can spend some time with us. So let's give her a warm Michigan welcome.
Thank you, Joe. That was like the best introduction ever. I'm super excited to be here. I don't know that I've been called a gorilla before, but I kind of like it. I should add that to my title, maybe. But thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited to actually have my first visit to the University of Michigan. So I'm really happy to connect with all of you. I had a great dinner with some of the faculty and PhD students last night, gave me some insights on the things that are happening here. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to share some of the things I've been working on, some of the insights that I have gained over the years related to public engagement. So I'm going to talk with you about how do we advance community engagement in urban planning research and education. So as planners, and how many of you are planners? Who considers yourself a planner in this room? Great. And all of us are probably small p planners, and all of us in this room are probably connected to communities in lots of ways. So I'm hopeful that even those who don't self-identify as a planner gain something from this talk, because I think it's for us who are in planning and design and have a sense of the need to and obligation to connect with communities. I think there's a lot of insight that we already have about how to do this well, and I think we have a long way to go. So I'm going to highlight some of those things today. So I want to talk about how we can take it to the next level, and I think also how we can lead our institutions. And I feel like I have taken a lot of what I've learned as a planner, both practical experience as well as insights from theory and research that I've done, to be able to drive some change at my own institution. And it's something that really motivates me in the work that I'm able to do as an associate dean and connected more broadly in academia. So I'm going to reflect first on what we know as planners, some of the basic things that probably all of us know here. And then I'm going to talk about how we might evolve what we do with greater intention and to take a more intentional, collaborative approach to engagement. So what do we know? I've put up Arnstein's famous ladder. It's 50 years old this year, which is pretty amazing. And I think there's a few things that come from this that are very, very obvious. What she's talking about here is there's a ladder of public participation. So some of the things she's saying within this is that some kinds of participation are better than others in some ways. They lead to higher levels of engagement. And in particular, as Sherry Arnstein framed it in the late 1960s, at this time of political turmoil and lots of social change happening, engagement and participation should be about power and the shifting of power, redistributing of power, identifying where power is held, who holds it, and how we transition that to give citizens, which I think is a word I tend not to use these days and substitute public or community or something like that, but how do we give people greater power? How do we share it? How do we intentionally redistribute it? So this is the foundation of how we think about public engagement in urban planning. It's at the core of who we are as part of our identity, and we know a lot about what works and what doesn't. So we know some kinds are better than others. We know that power matters, and it should be a really big conscious focus of the work that we do, whether it's in research or whether it's in practice. And we know that engagement continues to be a really important focus in planning, research, and practice. We still have lots of really great research that's going on in planning or around public engagement and planning, and we know that it's a really big focus in practice. As I look at graduates of our program at the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota, I see them doing amazing things. We have a regional planning requirement for updates of all of the comprehensive plans of the cities in the region. 180 or so plans were just finished in the last year. And I saw in this round, compared to the last round, just extraordinary things happening on public engagement. So we continue to increase our capacity as a field to do this work and to do it well and to do it with even greater intention and focus on social justice and equity and inclusion issues. Also, as we look at planning research, I think one indicator of this is I had the opportunity to co-edit a special issue on the 50th anniversary of the Arnstein Ladder article, which is one of the most cited, if not the most cited article in urban planning. Again, 50 years old. We had almost 100 abstracts submitted for that. So probably just a sampling of the research that's out there, but just that tremendous indication of interest just suggests how important this is. There are still important questions to be asked and lots of knowledge to be able to be generated to continue to enhance what we do and create greater intention. So I'm going to cover just a few of the sort of who, what, where, why, when kinds of things, just to remind us all of What do we know about public engagement, about how to do it well? So why? Why do we do it? In some cases, it's required. We often have very base level, minimal level of standards for public engagement that have to happen. Public hearings, consultations, things like that, that are established in policy. They might be established in law. They might be associated with environmental impact assessment requirements or city planning approvals. Those are base level kinds of engagement. And sometimes that's a reason why we do it. As planners, we know we're also ethically bound to do it. So I happen to be FAICP. Some of you in the room might be AICP or interested in pursuing that credential. And even if you're not, I think that AICP code is a reference point for many of us as we think about what does it mean to do this work and what are the guiding values that are really important in this. So I like to look back at the code occasionally, and I think there are really powerful statements in there. We shall give people the opportunity to have a meaningful impact on the development of plans and programs that may affect them. Participation should be broad enough to include those who lack formal organization or influence. This is a responsibility, an obligation that we have as planners, and it's something that's really at the core of what we do. I think we also know really well an important why is that people have knowledge. We know some things. We're trained as planners. We often have master's degrees or PhD degrees if we're researchers. We only know so much, and we know that there's knowledge, expertise that exists in people, in communities that are based on their experience, their context, their history, whatever it might be, and that knowledge is just as important as the knowledge that we have, and we aren't able to do our jobs as researchers or as practitioners in planning if we're not engaging that knowledge. And we know very clearly through fantastic studies that have been completed over the years that if we have more engagement, we get better plans. And as planners, we want the best quality plans that we can have. And there's really strong evidence to say that we actually get better plans and there's greater potential to implement them because we've built a base of support and the work that's in those plans is reflective of the community's interests. So the what do we know about how to do public engagement? And there's a ton of stuff that could show up on this slide, and I've highlighted just a few here. We know that processes that are more interactive are more effective. One-way flow of information, presentations on what we've done, those are fine, but they're not ways that we can actually facilitate learning, build relationships, build social capital among those who are participating, and especially to build trust. We have a really important obligation as planners to do this work in a way that breaks down barriers, that breaks down power dynamics, and really truly builds trust in planning, in public institutions, and whoever it is that we might be working with or for. We also know that there's been a growing conversation about the role of technology as a way of enhancing public engagement. And I've actually done some of this work using technology and looking at planners' use of technology. Technology can, and this is why I put it in italics to say technology can help, but I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the focus on technological tools has to be coupled with attention to purpose, to context, to power, and to capacity. So we can talk about social media as a really important engagement tool. We can talk about participatory GIS. We can talk about online portals that allow people to make comments, but that has to be nested within a bigger broader focus on purpose. Why are we doing this? Context, power, and capacity. Who is served by, who is truly engaged by these tools? Is it advantaging the people who are already easily engaging and lack the barriers to participation? That's a really important piece of this. We also know that practices that are more inclusive are ones that go beyond seeking input. So my colleague at the University of Minnesota, Kathy Quick, talks about generating power by building the capacity of the community to implement the decisions and tackle related issues. So it isn't about participation, which is often about transaction. Here's an idea, here's a plan, we want your feedback, even we want your input. But how do we create inclusive processes where there's more of a focus on relationship? And I think there's more and more evidence, discussion, research that's happening in that space of how do we truly get to inclusion or inclusive practices? So that's another piece of the what. And then in terms of where and when, I think these are obvious ones, and there's a lot that we know about how to do this. Importantly, in terms of the where, we need to be in communities. We need to go where people are, inviting them to City Hall, inviting them to a state agency office, inviting them to the university is going to exclude a lot of people. It reinforces power dynamics, which I think can be quite problematic. I think we have a real responsibility to go to people. I highlight Ajin Lee's work on immigrants and engagement, refugees and engagement, and ways that we need to be more attentive to the barriers that they face and true fear that they face in coming, in many cases, to public buildings. So she talks about using informal spaces, understanding where these groups are already coming together and meeting them there, being a support, connecting with them in spaces that feel safe. In terms of when, we know that we can't just create a plan and say, hey, what do you think? Give me some feedback on this plan. We know this. I mean, we've known this for a really long time in planning. We also know that collaborative processes are much more effective. So engaging people from the start, co-designing the process in a way that's attentive to the needs, the interests, the motivations of all of those that are involved, and ensuring that they're continuing to participate. We're able to do that, or when we're able to do that, we can facilitate learning, and we know that we can actually achieve consensus in many cases on really contentious issues, and I've experienced this, and it is really powerful to be able to know that this can happen. So in terms of the who, we know that we should be engaging stakeholders, and we should truly be understanding who has a stake in many of the issues that we're dealing with. And we need to consider those who have formal interest and formal power, but we also need to be very explicit and very intentional in identifying those who may, on the surface, lack interest, and certainly those who lack power to participate, and look at ways that we're designing processes, reaching out to those who fall anywhere on that spectrum of interest and power. We need to engage those who have not historically been represented. We need to use intentional recruitment. One of the newest practices that have emerged that has emerged in the last 10 years or so is using organizers and local nonprofit organizations that have trust and have legitimacy with these communities that we're wanting to engage, who have been underrepresented, actually using public resources to fund these organizations to assist with engagement and bring individuals into the process in a way that feels comfortable and works for them. And importantly, and I think I want to emphasize this last piece, is that we also need to be attentive to those who've been actively excluded. So not just those underrepresented as we look at the whole range of folks who might be engaged. We also know that some people have been actively excluded by the structures that we have, via policy, via discrimination, via other informal barriers that exist. There's a lot of really great research that's emerging on culturally appropriate planning practices, attentiveness to the unique interests, challenges, fears that immigrants, refugees, and colonized groups have experienced, and ways that we can be attentive to that as we design public engagement processes. So, very quick snapshot of what we know. Many of you know other things about how to do public engagement well, but I wanted to just sort of lay that groundwork and provide that sort of basic framework as we move on and think about how do we actually take that to the next level? What does that look like? 50 good years of working on public engagement of planning? What's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 50 years when Arnstein's ladder is 100 years old? That'll be amazing. Hopefully I'll still be alive. I'll be quite old at that point, but it would be amazing to reflect again on what has happened in the last 50 years. So to think where we were then, where we are now, and how we might take it to the next level. So a few things that I think about, just based on work that I've done, the research that I'm seeing, and the trajectory in this space, amazing practices that planners are using in the field. I see real opportunities to do kind of 5 key things that are here. 1, what if we shifted the goal of public engagement to building a long-term relationship? So just think for a moment about a public engagement process that you participated in, you designed, whether you're a student or a faculty member or anyone else who might be in the room. Think of a process that you were involved and something you were trying to facilitate public engagement on. Often we think, well, I really need feedback on this, or I really need input on this. I understand that there's knowledge in the community and I need to bring that in. But what if we go even beyond that to say that an overarching goal is this of this effort is to build an ongoing relationship? Yes, there's something that happens in the near term, something we need feedback on, input on, whatever it might be. But what if we're also thinking about the long-term relationship? How do we change the way that we're interacting people? How do we change the way that we're designing processes? It's an interesting thought exercise and something that I certainly haven't always done, but I think is really helpful. Another piece of this is that I think there's even greater opportunity for all of us to play a role in setting the agenda. I think there's an orientation and just sort of a natural tendency to bring expertise related to process design or public engagement or just planning generally. And we're often thinking about what do we need? And that need is often very positive and good intentions associated with it. But what if we asked, what do participants need from this process? What do they want out of it? What do they need to feel truly engaged, to be able to take something from this process that allows them to that has positive impacts in their personal lives or their work lives or whatever it might be? I think it's just a shift in focus. Another piece of this is just truly valuing all of the expertise that's out there. And I use this word expertise pretty frequently to acknowledge, I think there's often an orientation to say, well, university people are experts. There's all this expertise within the university. But to acknowledge and position expertise outside of the university, to call it expertise, I think is a really important signal, and note that there's expertise everywhere, and this expertise is absolutely essential to addressing the issues that we're all concerned about. I think we need even more of a focus on building capacity for all. So not just universities or planning departments thinking about, well, how can we build the capacity of the community? Thinking about how our capacity needs to be built as well, and doing that through intentional learning from these processes, doing that through evaluation, doing that through intention that we think about related to relationship building. And then again, I think we still have a lot to do as it relates to sharing and redistributing power. So I'm going to talk about several examples that kind of function at the intersection of research and practice. And I'm going to focus specifically on examples that are more about stakeholder engagement than general public involvement. So just wanted to kind of share that note about the framing. And so many of these connect to university-wide engagement, but I'm going to frame as well ways that they can be informative to planning practice as well. So the first case that I want to highlight actually comes from my colleague Kathy Quick and her collaborator Guillermo Narvaez. They're both at the University of Minnesota and have done a lot of research related to transportation safety issues on American Indian reservations in northern Minnesota. So in this case, the project emerged from an interest that our Minnesota Department of Transportation had related to disparities in crash rates, fatal crash rates in particular among American Indians. They noticed this in the data and wanted to really dig into this as an agency. There are a variety of ways that they could do this, and one of the first things they wanted to do is do some research to be able to understand more deeply what was happening in this case. They supported research that in this case, Kathy and Guillermo did in a way that was deeply engaged with these communities and was deeply focused on building trust. I think one of the things that we acknowledge related to American Indian communities, and particularly in reservation areas, is there's a lot of trauma that these communities have experienced. There's a lot of marginalization that these communities have experienced, and a tremendous lack of trust for those who are coming outside. And this is a project where they approached this with a very deep focus on building trust first, before they even started doing anything else. A real focus on building relationships. Once they were able to build that up, and that meant spending a lot of time in these communities and having initial conversations, figuring out who the local experts were on the Native American communities, and really thinking about the full range of experts, those in formal leadership positions on the reservation communities, as well as those who who are observing and experiencing some of the transportation safety issues. So they conducted interviews with this full range of local experts in order to inform the research that they did. Some of the things that they found were really unexpected. I think there was some assumption within MnDOT and others that a lot of these accidents were drug and alcohol related, just sort of something we kind of assume based on what we hear in media and other kind of stereotypical characterizations. And what they found is things that were pretty unexpected, that a lot of it was about pedestrian safety. There were jurisdictional issues related to emergency services and the provision of infrastructure, which were really problematic. And simply using the traditional ways of gathering data, running numbers on quantitative data that were out there would never have been able to reveal this. And that's really significant. And I want to share a few quotes that come from the report that they put together for MnDOT in this case and shared extensively with the communities they worked with. It's really powerful language, and I think language is something that I want to come back to as we get to the end, but want to point out the paucity of American Indian scholars and community voices in prior research about reservation roadway safety issues is an ethical, empirical, and methodological problem. So to say the fact that we haven't done this isn't just something we failed to do from an ethical or values perspective, we just did bad research, is really, really significant to be able to say we have failed from an empirical and a methodological perspective because we haven't engaged these voices and this knowledge in the process. That's really important framing. We conducted this research in collaboration with. We didn't just engage them. We didn't have participation processes. We didn't get feedback from them. We conducted it in collaboration with, et cetera, et cetera. Our collaborators, so framing those that they worked with, interviewees, others that they connected with as collaborators, guided us to develop better interview questions and to interpret data about the contexts and complex relationships of causality and the high crash rate, constraints on exchanging and interpreting data, and needs for developing and deploying effective management policies. So think about that shift in language. And again, this is a university research project, but you can think about this as you're framing work on any planning project that might exist in a community. The most important guiding principle was to work with willing partners, not insert ourselves into reservation communities where researchers' skills or interests were not needed or welcome. So again, signaling that understanding what the community needs, understanding what the collaborators need to get out of this to feel like it's valuable. That's a really important piece. So I love this language. It's like an amazing model that I keep going back to as I think about this language piece. Another case that I want to highlight, it relates to some work that I was involved in when I was in the Vice President for Research office. And this, I think, to me, really emphasizes how do we think about that positioning of expertise within the university and positioning expertise outside. And again, you can translate this to expertise that exists in a planning department or a consulting firm or wherever you might be as a planning practitioner, and the expertise that exists in the communities that you're working to engage. So I had the opportunity to organize convenings on kind of big societal issues. We did 6 of these. We did aging, health equity, renewable energy, smart cities, food systems, and water supply. So I had a very general charge to bring some people together to talk about this stuff from different disciplines inside and outside the university. So bringing my intention and my experience as a planner to this, what I really wanted to do is really think about how do we position these as ways to bring together all of the expertise that exists around these important societal issues. Often we're framing things as, you know, the university is going to solve grand challenges. That's a framing that we use at the University of Minnesota. It's being used in a variety of ways at a number of universities, but we're going to solve them. And in this case, I wanted to sort of shift away from that language to say, if we're going to work on these things, if we're going to make any progress on these things, we need all of the expertise that exists wherever it happens to be, in communities, in industry, in public sector, in nonprofits, as well as in academia. So really thought about how to be able to do that and to facilitate the sharing of expertise through the process that we were going to use. We really wanted to identify new opportunities for collaboration among these different experts and to co-identify research questions that we might pursue in the future. And we wanted to really build connections connections and build a community of experts around these topics. Many of these folks were connected, but we also knew there were voices that were missing and expertise that was missing on these pieces. So I really thought about how do you craft an agenda for collaboration and craft an agenda that actually positions everyone in the room as an expert. So the first thing I did is really build a creative and diverse invitation list. They're the obvious people when you pick any of these topics, obvious within the university, obvious within all of the various sectors outside of the university. Really think about who is doing this work and do a lot of digging to say who's not represented on existing advisory committees, who's not represented in conversations or prior convenings, and really do the digging to be able to build a creative and diverse invitation list, and probably be inviting people who've never been invited to anything at the university before. And I worked hard to personalize those invitations. Certainly there was a broad Eventbrite invitation that went out, but I followed that up with people who I knew had been left out of prior processes, who've been underrepresented, and who I thought really needed to be at the table to bring all of that expertise to bear. So sent out personal invites to say, I read your really great report on the challenges that we have with health data and racial and ethnic categories. So there was this really tiny nonprofit, Voices for Racial Justice, that had done this amazing report. I read that report and I wrote to them and I said, I know that you haven't been engaged in these issues before. It would be so great to be able to have you there. And would you be one of the speakers that helps to kick off our conversation? A speaker from an organization like that is positioned against agency leaders, put on the stage with university leaders and experts at different levels. In addition, as people were signing up for the event, we asked them what they would be interested in talking about with other participants. We wrote every one of those items down that they identified and put them on a list that we shared at the beginning of the event. So people could come in and say, oh, there's my topic that I suggested. They heard it. Other people are seeing it. People know what it is that I might be there, or at least others in the room might be interested in talking about. I created assigned seating to be able to very intentionally mix people across university, across different sectors, across different levels in their career, really thinking about, well, I have the Commissioner of Agriculture who's going to be one of the speakers. Who's someone who's new in the field or who's doing really awesome work, who probably hasn't had a chance to ever meet the Commissioner of Agriculture? I'm going to put that person at the table to give them a chance to be able to do this work. This takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, but it's an amazing way to be able to use your power, whether you're powerful within a university or powerful within an external organization. We kicked off the event with brief catalyst presentations by experts. And again, often at universities or even related to planning projects, we're having the planning experts up there. We're having the university experts, the top people who we want to showcase and put out there. In this case, we had a mix of usually full and associate and assistant professors. We had experts from the field. We had kind of junior people who might be working in organizations. We had very established senior people, and really positioned this as a group of representative experts in this area. We used some facilitation in order to be able to have conversations about questions people were interested in discussing with others, and we did that in a way that was very jargon-free. I have a lot of problems with facilitation practices that have annoying names, unnecessary explanations. Let's just have a conversation. It doesn't have to be called a World Cafe or anything like. I have a lot of wonderful colleagues at the University of Minnesota who love the World Cafe, but like, why do we have to call it a World Cafe? It's just an interactive conversation. We don't have to give it a name and the associated sort of status that, you know, distinguishes it from something that we just might do together at a table. We don't have to give it a name and say that I, as a facilitator, know more than you. So that's just my little rant about facilitation. So I handpicked someone who I knew would not do that and who was just extremely accessible and was so experienced. We had lots of discussions at tables around issues that individuals in the room identified in real time that they wanted to talk about others, and people were able to opt into those conversations. We used seed grants to be able to facilitate follow-up. So we had small grants that the university was sponsoring as well as a local foundation we gave out those grants to university and community collaborators, new teams that came together to do work that followed directly from these conversations. And we created some really great reports and did it right after the event to be able to reflect back. We heard you, we saw you, we had lots of pictures. Oh, there you are, you're great. That sort of thing. Those important signals that we can do or provide to be able to really value the work that's happening. The next case that I want to talk about is the Resilient Communities Project. So Joe mentioned this in the introduction. And one of the things that the Resilient Communities Project work represents is this emphasis on building capacity, and not just building capacity for someone who's outside of your organization, outside of the university, but really thinking about building capacity for all who might be involved. So Resilient Communities Project is 6 years old now. It was created as a way to facilitate deeper, more sustained collaborations between communities and the University of Minnesota. I had the opportunity to create this program and direct it for a number of years. So what this does is facilitates a year-long collaboration between one Minnesota city and the University of Minnesota. It's actually evolved a little bit in recent years, and we worked with counties and cities, and now we actually have 3 cities we're working with. An extensive, more sustained collaboration. Often we have a sort of one-off model where we're doing a project, it fits into a capstone or a class. We reached out and say, hey, do you have a project? Or someone says, hey, I have a project, can you do it? And that's it. So what we wanted to do here is engage the university on a body of work that was a priority for the community partner. Communities apply, they identify their priorities, they identify their interests, they talk about why they're important to the community, the support that exists for doing this work, and we select a community to work with each year. Typically, we work on about 20 or so, sometimes 30 projects that the community identifies that are already priorities for them, and we match it with 30, 40, 50 classes at the University of Minnesota, so not just in planning. These are existing courses already happening, already have faculty, already will have students in them, and we're creating opportunities for those students to do projects that are priorities for the community. We have staff that help facilitate really great projects, coordinating with the staff in the city, and making sure these projects work well and meet the needs of the community. In many cases, we're working with faculty who have never done a community engaged project before and just have no idea how to do it. And we're delivering a project to them that's well formed, it's appropriately scoped for fitting into a class. We're giving them support in the relationship with the city. And it's really, really powerful to have these instructors talk about having done this for the first time and how it's changing the way that they're going to be teaching their class in the future. And students, in some cases, who haven't had the chance to work on a community engaged project just happen to show up in a class and realize, oh, we get to work on an RCP project. And to be able to see that happening is really amazingly powerful. I think one of the things we also did really intentionally with this is kind of reframe the language and sort of assumption that the university has answers or solutions and communities have problems. So we're going to help you solve your problems. Like, you're a problem. Like, that's not appropriate framing. It's offensive framing. So what we try to really emphasize here is it's a collaboration. We're bringing the expertise that comes from these communities with the expertise that exists within the university, not just in faculty, but also students, to be able to do really amazing work. And we have this very intentional focus on building long-term capacity. And in the text on the right, you can see how we're thinking about that. So we are creating opportunities to build a body of work on community scale resilience projects. And resilience, I will say, quite broadly defined. So we have more and more projects that have this framing. It's a body of work that can be shared within this community and among other communities. We are building city staff capacity to do this work, to collaborate with each other in many cases across departments and collaborate with the university. After this, they will know many faculty at the university and have access to them and be able to reach out again if they're interested in working on something together. Faculty capacity for engaged education. I already talked about this. Many faculty who've never done this before now have the capacity and experience to do community engagement. Student learning is another piece. So providing opportunities in a class you would never expect to be able to connect to a project. Youth studies, for example, various classes in business or human resources or engineering, bringing in projects in a way that they never had before and the learning associated with that. These are really important aspects of this that are really about building capacity and sort of lifting everything up through a more engaged model. Two more cases. One is a case of just a single workshop. So it's a very discrete engagement experience, but something that was really interesting and really powerful to see happen for me. I helped design this workshop and helped to facilitate it. I worked with a number of researchers at the University of Minnesota and a broader team across the US from various universities on an urban heat island workshop. So we had really innovative, creative research that was happening around understanding the dynamics of urban heat, where it's happening, how it's happening, what are the causes, things like that. They had produced lots and lots of data related to a number of cities. But we're at the point of, what does this mean? What do we actually do with this information? How might people use it? So we often might think, well, we need tech transfer, or we need to translate this for the public. We need to write a report that the public or agencies or whoever might be interested in, and maybe it'll change their practices. But what happened here is to intentionally bring in experts from practice midway through the project to be able to highlight land use and design strategies that could actually be used to apply the findings that the research team was coming up with. So we brought together a workshop that included the research team and also practitioners from planning and landscape architecture and engineering and public health to come together, bringing their expertise on policy tools and planning tools and design tools, physical planning strategies that could be used to actually implement mitigation and adaptation measures that were responsive to what we know about the dynamics of urban heat now and in the future. And to be able to bring that knowledge, position it relative to the research knowledge that was being generated was really powerful. So you can see with some of the photos that are on the right, a very interactive workshop where we gave the participants the opportunity to work on a site. So the workshop started out by identifying some of the research findings, talk about how they translated into actions that might be taken on the landscape, and then the opportunity to apply them to a particular site that the participants were familiar with. So they were looking at a map of a site, identifying different strategies that they might use related to infrastructure and other tools that might be available. So again, very interactive, bringing in the expertise related to implementation and positioning it as equivalent and important relative to the research. And then the last case I want to highlight, I'm doing this for Dr. Goodspeed because we were talking about this last night, some work that I've done on a project that was called Collaborative Geodesign for Multifunctional Landscapes. So this was on the poster. So one of the things that was really important about this is the way that we thought about process as a way to empower and shift power among stakeholders and among those we were engaging in this process. So this was a very extensive research project, lots of experts from across the university. I was the planner, we had a landscape architect, we had a GIS expert, we had other geographers, we had agronomists, we had soil scientists, computer scientists, all involved in this project. So a very traditional research project, but with a focus on engaging stakeholders around this idea of how do we transition our landscapes, agricultural landscapes, to be more multifunctional. And we know that landscapes that have greater diversity, a variety of different plants or ways that we're using the land, managing the land, have greater environmental benefits. And increasingly we acknowledge that there are greater economic benefits associated with that as well. So we wanted to engage a range of stakeholders from conservation, from agriculture, from community development, economic development, to have a conversation about what would it look like to apply practices of multifunctional landscapes in a particular watershed in southern Minnesota. So I, in this case, was the process expert on the team and designed a stakeholder process to be able to do this with a real intention on how do we empower these stakeholders who come from very different perspectives, who see a piece of multifunctionality in the work that they do, to understand with each other, or build an understanding with each other about the prospects for multifunctionality, which has the potential for even greater benefits for the things that they're doing. So we had a 2-year stakeholder process, again, with a broad range of stakeholders. You can see some of them. We did a tour of some of that highlighted some of these multifunctional practices as one of the first activities. We started by exploring issues and values, just talking to this group about what it is that they're seeing on the landscape, what it is that they're working on, what are the values that they have related to the landscapes that they live on and work on and do work related to. What do they know? What are things that they know about this landscape and how it's changing? For example, what do they want? What do they want to see? How do they want to be supported? What do they need from this process? So over the course of several meetings, which was a lot about conversation and learning from each other and gaining context, we then moved into creating some design principles. So what if we took these values and translated them into ways of designing the land, using the land that was more attentive to multifunctionality? How do we design for greater ag productivity, economic value, and environmental benefits? And we wanted to support this group in doing that by looking at different scenarios. This is really complicated stuff. These are very large landscapes. There are environmental functions of these landscapes. There are changing economic conditions related to agricultural products and things like that, changing agricultural practices, equipment, things like that. This is really complicated, and it's very divisive in many cases as we have debates about the impacts of agriculture on water. So all of this playing out, we wanted to create this opportunity to support this group in having a conversation, a safe conversation, a supported conversation, to look at future landscapes in a way that was consistent with their values that they had a chance to reveal in this process. So we developed a technology to be able to support them in doing that. We heard what they were asking for. We heard what they needed from this process. We heard what they wanted to be able to do and created a technology for them to be able to do that. We had a lot of grant funding, I will say. So this is a quite unique process. I'll show you the bottom one here. You can see we were able to purchase very large touch screens, about this wide and about this tall, essentially giant iPads they were mobile. They fit into boxes that we were able to take down to a rural county in southern Minnesota to be able to do this work. We met with the stakeholders there in the watershed every time, usually every month. So we had these screens that were able to provide this technology that assisted them in developing potential scenarios for multifunctional agriculture. And you can see a small group that's working on one of them. Often multiple people are touching it and drawing and using the technology at the same time. And it was just really powerful to be able to observe. So I'm zooming in on the interface that we were able to create in this case. Lots and lots of background data related to agriculture, environment, economics, all within this tremendous GIS and computer science expertise to be able to build this. I don't know how to build any of this stuff, but I heard from this group what it is that they wanted to do. They really wanted to test out different practices. They wanted to learn about how different practices interact with each other. They wanted to understand and play with ideas about what does it look like to get to multifunctionality. They wanted to bring their knowledge of this landscape and say, well, it might on the surface make sense to put something here, but I know really what's happening there. And I've observed changes in this particular ravine that have happened over the last few years. And this is what I think. We heard those things. So we gave them access to different practices that they might apply: alfalfa, corn stover removal, low phosphorus practices, prairie grass, switchgrass, cover crops, things like that they could choose and they could draw just using their finger on the screen and apply those practices. We also gave them background information that they could use. So they didn't want to just draw. They wanted to understand what was happening on the landscape and make good choices that reflected their values that were really important to them. So they were looking at, well, where are the roads? Where's the water? What's the land cover existing? Where's their potential for wetland restoration? Where are there sensitive ecological or wildlife concerns that are important? Where do we have soil erosion risk? And how do we actually use that information to make the best choices that we can about where to put this stuff? And then we wanted them to be able to in real time, explore a variety of scenarios for this landscape, apply practices, and understand what they mean for multifunctionality. So here you can see this is a very simple design where they've applied a few different practices, and instantaneously they can get their performance to say, what does this mean for multifunctionality? And here they're actually comparing between a couple. Sediment, they can see that there's an improvement in sediment, the amount of soil that's running off the landscape associated with this one, a decline or in phosphorus, which is good, less water running off the landscape, an improvement in habitat quality, and an improvement in market return. So you can see how you can adjust the practices that you're using to be able to maximize across all of these things, which we think are often competing. Well, we can't protect the environment and have market value. In this case, we can, and you can start to build that knowledge about how do you do it by allowing iteration to happen. And because we had this great technology, it was easy to do it in real time. Even in the course of like an hour session, we had people doing 10 different designs and iterating and improving and trying to get the best performance that they could get to. So again, really building their capacity and empowering them with information that they got from us, that they got from each other, which is another important piece. We heard from them that they didn't like some of our assumptions about the prices of different commodities that we put in. We created an adjustable slider bar. So in real time, they can say, well, corn is like not so great right now, but we assume it's going to go up in the future. So let's increase the price, or soybeans or biomass, whatever it might be. So they have the ability to adjust. And we were hearing them and designing a technology that supported the things that they wanted to do. And then last, this is just a comparison across a broader range of designs that they were doing. You can position them side by side so you can see what this landscape might look like. So again, just sort of a really powerful process and really thinking about how technology isn't the thing that's in the lead. Technology is supportive of the collaboration, of the conversations that they want to have, a way for them to apply their values that were reflected in these design principles that they came up with. So I want to go back to what I said I was going to talk about. Hopefully I talked about it. How do we take it to the next level? How do we shift the goal to building a long-term relationship? In many of these things, it was, if not explicit, it was in the background, and certainly something that I've worked hard to do, to really think about the long-term relationship with any of these individuals that I was able to connect with or that I supported others in connecting with. How do we think about in these cases, was there a role for all in setting the agenda? Think back to Kathy Quick and Guillermo Narvaez and their work. They were talking first with individuals on the reservations about what they were seeing, what was important to them, what do they want to know from this research, not just what does MnDOT want to know or what does good research practice tell Kathy and Guillermo that they should know. How do we value all expertise? How do we do so through the language that we use? How do we support the revealing and application of all of our expertise through technology and things like that? How do we build capacity for all with real intention? And how do we share and distribute power? So I've got 3 slides of very short takeaways. So even if you never have a chance to do the kinds of things that I talked about here, there are lots of things and lots of choices, lots of practices that can be applied by any one of you in small things that you're doing, even in a student group, or even in the way that you do things in your department, or in broader efforts related to community engagement, such as new work you'll start in Detroit in the coming months, I've heard. Little things show respect and value. Build relationships first, go to people, go get out of your office and go to their office, wherever it is, and meet with them. I think one of the things I hate about being an associate dean is that everyone comes to me. And I just my schedule is so messed up and tight that I can't go out as much as I want to. And often I'm trying to adjust things to be able to go to other people, especially outside the university. Really thinking about who we're putting on the agenda. How much time are they getting? Are we giving the university people more time than the community people? Are the university people presenting and the community is reacting? How are we crafting these agendas? Whose expertise are we valuing? And how much time are we attributing to it? How long are bios and introductions? I think one of the things that's really difficult about events that are about sharing information is we have extensive bios, and Joe, you did a wonderful bio of me, and it was very natural, and it wasn't just a reading of, okay, she went to school here, and she did this, and this, and this. It was more organic, and I think especially if you have multiple speakers or individuals who are leading something, using very short bios, just shifting them to a handout. It's just about, I mean, it's such a signal of privilege and power, and it just feels really, really unnecessary. How's the room arranged? Who sits where? Who sits with whom? Are we really thinking about how to bring people together who wouldn't otherwise have a chance to sit together? Are we shifting power in that way? How can you be a host if you are a convener, if you are a facilitator? I think one of the hard things is I'm often scrambling at the last minute to like deal with some crisis with a microphone or a PowerPoint or food or whatever. Make sure that that's done in advance so you can be standing at the door and welcome these people who hadn't shown up at the university before, hadn't been invited, to say, I am so glad you're here. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for emailing. I'm really glad you're here. Look at their pictures online so you can see who they are and anticipate when they're coming in. So a community meeting as a planner, just stand at the door. Don't stand behind a table. Point people to the food, ask them if you can get them a coffee, whatever it might be. These are tiny things that mean so much and reduce the power differential that often exists. Use your power to engage those not represented. I talked about this in a bunch of ways. Who's in small or new organizations that are working on issues in diverse communities, who aren't represented, who have been marginalized or even excluded? Who are emerging leaders, big thinkers, future superstars in established organizations? I think we have a tendency to want to get the leaders, the VIPs, like, yes, we got the Commissioner of Ag. Our Commissioner of Ag is great. I did get him at an event. But who are the lower level people who are doing really amazing things? How can I get them at this event? How can I use my power to create an opportunity to network, to be visible, to be part of a conversation? I think it's shocking how many times I'm the youngest person in a meeting. I mean, this happened especially at the university. And I am not young. Like, I'm actually quite old. And so often I am like the youngest person in the meeting still. It's shocking. So how can we make sure that we're bringing in students, new professionals, whoever it might be, junior faculty, depending on what context you're working in? How do we give a platform, position others' expertise as relevant? How do we signal legitimacy? Like, oh, Carissa invited this person in. They must be really great. That's a way to shift our power. And that's, I think, a really important piece of this. How do we sustain engagement? Really thinking about that long game of the relationship. I think we need to change the language and the approach. We're not doing something for you, we're doing something with you. Build relationships with engaged leaders, connect new faculty to external partners. So often we have mentor programs where we're connecting people to a few other faculty. Are we also connecting them with people outside of the university that relate to their area of interest? This is sort of university specific, but you might also think about this in practice. As new planners are coming into your city planning department, are you connecting them with key leaders in neighborhood organizations, in partner agencies that you're working with? It's a very easy opportunity. Give opportunities for ongoing engagement, co-create rather than just update, move away from that transaction. Sustain relationships, especially with underrepresented organizations, is a really important priority. And you just have to nurture these relationships. This is very personal, very individualized work where if you haven't connected with someone in a while, just reach out and have a coffee, even if you don't need something from them. Even if you don't have a project, even if you don't have a meeting coming up that you want them to attend. It's about sustaining the relationship and really thinking about yourself as part of a community that exists and is moving work forward in a space that you're working in. So we know a lot about engagement. We're really smart. We've gained a lot of knowledge. We're continuing to do really fantastic research on engagement and fantastic, innovative, creative practices for engagement. But I think we can do more to take it to the next level. And I think we can lead our higher ed institutions for those who are here as students or as faculty. I think planners have a lot to offer in this space. So I hope this has inspired you a little bit. Okay, that's it. Thank you.